Welcome to the Weights and Plates podcast. I am Robert Santana. I am your host, along with Trent Jones, my co-host.
Hello. Hello. Merry Christmas, sir.
Merry Christmas to you, sir.
Yeah, we say Merry Christmas on this podcast, not Happy Holiday.
We sure do. I sure do.
But even if you don't celebrate Merry Christmas, I hope you had a good holiday.
Well, on December 25th, it's a specific holiday, you know?
It is, yeah.
So what's this happy holiday shit, you know?
It's an American holiday, whether you celebrate the meaning behind it or not.
Mm-hmm. No, but
and so is New Year's. So when this comes out, it's going to be just a couple days from New Year's. So Happy New Year as well.
Happy New Year as well.
So we thought that today we do something a little bit different. This is the last episode of 2023.
Wow.
We thought we'd just do a quick, just a quick episode talking about some of the lessons we've learned this year about training, diet, coaching other people, just watching other people. I think it's kind of interesting to look back over the year and kind of figure out, hey, did I learn anything? Because sometimes I feel like I don't. Mm-hmm. I didn't. But if I sit down and kind of reflect a little bit, I'm like, actually, I learned some stuff. I learned some stuff here, and maybe that could be helpful to you, dear listener.
Yeah, man, I can't believe we're doing the last episode of the year. It's kind of crazy.
Yeah, I didn't check like what episode number this is, but we're getting up there.
67.
67? Yeah. Dang, it's not 69.
Not yet, dude. Not yet.
So close.
We need the Beavis and Butthead people to be like, this episode's 69. Dude, the new episodes were kind of funny. Not going to lie.
Wait, like how new?
Like last year.
I don't think I saw those. I think I missed those. There were a couple a few years ago that were pretty funny. Damn, I'm going to have to go check this out. I didn't know there was more Beavis and Butthead.
There was a movie, too, in 2022.
Well, shit. Man, where was I?
I don't know.
I love this stuff. The best Beavis and Butthead bits for me were the when they would basically like shit on music videos. Mm-hmm. They just watch MTV. I guess you have to go on YouTube to find them because they would play during the commercial breaks sometimes.
Oh yeah.
During the actual show, like when the original run. Oh, it was so good.
Well, now they watch YouTube and make fun of those music videos.
Okay, yeah. There you go.
They watch music videos on YouTube. So yeah, man, we covered a lot this year. I don't know where to start.
Yeah, well,
I shed on hypertrophy a lot.
Right? Yeah. Did we? Well, we still haven't killed the beast. It just won't die.
It won't.
It will not die. And we won't name any names here, but there's definitely a lot of people out there in social media still banging that drum.
Yep.
And I think, okay, so resolution. Here's a resolution for you if you need some resolution. You probably should just stop fucking watching all fitness content next year and just train instead. Mm-hmm. But I know it's hard because, I like to watch it too. I like to watch some of it too. But if it says hypertrophy in the title, don't watch it.
Yeah,
I think that's a good New Year's resolution.
For the most part, that's what I do. There's very few people I'll watch on that.
Yeah, unless it's the Weights and Plates podcast. If we use the word hypertrophy, then you can listen to us. We're safe.
Yeah,
because we're just doing it. We're doing it for the clickbait.
Mm-hmm. Because if you see it on one of our titles, there's a good chance I'm going on a rant.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Look, I spent most of my younger years wasting time on this stupid shit. And I've talked about it on here till I'm blue in the face. And I'll keep talking about it, but, at the end of the day, when you look at people that are big and muscular, they're never weak. They're never weak. They're never piss weak. They may not be an IPF world champion. They don't train that way usually, but they may not be an IPF world champion, but that doesn't mean they're fucking weak. You don't see a guy who's, of normal height, 5'10", let's say he's 200 pounds and low body fat. He's not, barely benching 135, But on the same token, just because you see the 165-pound guy benching 315, he's the outlier, okay? And he's bigger than he was before he trained, too. Let's keep that in mind,
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
People love to point that out. Oh, I know this little skinny guy that lifts a bunch of weight. And first of all, they usually don't tell you that the person's benching a lot. They'll say they're deadlifting or squatting a lot.
Right. Yeah, they've got the Lamar Gant type deadlift leverages where they 4-inch lockout or whatever. Yep. Yeah, you get those types where like, I've got some friends who are really into Brazilian jiu-jitsu and other martial arts, and it attracts a young crowd, and you get these good athletes there, and they're just like, oh man, there's this one guy, he's so small, but dude, he'll kick your ass. He's just so fucking strong. And I'm like, yeah, I mean, some of that is the training adaptation. If you grew up wrestling from a young age, it's kind of like forearm strength. It's just, there's a certain amount of strength in that application that you just gain from lots of years. Even if you're small, these are all like small skinny dudes for the most part. These are your like,
of course,
5'7", 155 pound, 65 pound guys. But the other thing is that I think is always funny is like, a lot of those guys are fucking strong because they're really good at their sport, and the whole sport is leverage.
Oh yeah.
Right? We talk about in the barbell world, moment arms. We at least in the starting strength world, we talk about moment arm analysis, right? Which is like if you lift incorrectly, or what we would consider incorrectly, the reason we consider it incorrect is because it's inefficient from a mechanical standpoint, right? If you create unnecessary moment arms, it makes the weight feel a lot heavier than it actually is. Well, it's the same thing in like jiu-jitsu or whatever. Like a guy that's really, really good knows how to like put his body and your body into a position where he doesn't have to use a lot of force to end up torquing the shit out of you. Right. And so that makes these little tiny guys appear that they're really, really fucking strong. But I don't believe that these same guys are deadlifting 600.
No.
It's not, it's a different thing.
And I also don't believe that a guy who's 145 is going to beat the ever-living shit out of a guy who's 365.
No.
These are weight class sports for a reason,
That's right. Yeah, in a real fight. Yeah.
An actual fight.
In a real fight. The thing is, in a real fight, you pull out your pistol and
yeah. Let's assume you try to brawl. The guy who's 365 is not going to be fazed by this 145-pound guy, no matter how flashy his moves are.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's not going to go to the ground. He's fucking laying on you.
Okay. I'm sure there's an outlier. There always is. I don't care. We're not talking about outliers here,
Right. Dude, all the people into they're really into BJJ just are like swerving off the road right now.
Oh yeah.
Fuming. Look, the sport is really cool.
Absolutely.
It's not my thing. It's hardcore. You don't have to like preach to me about how hardcore it is. Dude, I know it is. I know I can't hang in that environment. Wrestling, those guys are fucking hardcore too. Way more than like powerlifters and stuff. Like that's, all due respect there. But yeah, I think the misunderstanding of like athletic adaptations is kind of funny to me. So hopefully we've educated some of y'all out there, or at least kind of cleared up some misunderstandings. I certainly have clarified my thoughts on some things. I was trying to think about this year, like what did I learn from a training perspective? And that's a tough one. I think you could say from one perspective, this year has been one of the worst training years I've ever had since I've started training. I'm weaker at all the 4 main lifts than I was this time last year. Pretty much across the board. But I think there's some context there. I'm also 10 pounds lighter than I was last year, which on my frame is not a small amount. And I'm not that much weaker than I was last year. I'm within 10% of most of the numbers I was hitting last year at this time. And so, one of the things I've learned in this process is that, I've been dealing with a lot of limitations in terms of my recovery. And I've talked about that a lot on the podcast, but one thing I've learned in this whole year is when you have those limitations, really drilling down on one goal in terms of, physical goals, really drilling down on one thing helps a lot. And at some point, I remember early in this year, I was kind of fucking around like, well, what I want to do. Like, I know I'm not going to, I was in no danger of like working back up to hitting like PRs or whatever this year. So I was like, well, maybe I'll just, like do some different style of training. Maybe I'll do some hypertrophy training or some different shit, right?
Right.
And I kind of spun my wheels for like 3 months until finally I was like, all right, look, this year I don't have a whole lot of time to dedicate to training. It's not going to change anytime soon. I'm not going to be able to gain much weight at all this year, if any. And so what am I going to do? Okay, I want to get stronger. I want to get stronger on the big 4 barbell lifts. I'm going to cut out all of the accessories, more or less. I do some chin-ups and shit, but that's about it. And once I did that, that gave me a very clear goal with my programming. Okay, I need to drive these numbers up in these rep ranges.
Absolutely.
And then once I started doing that, I've had pretty smooth sailing. Now, some big interruptions and stuff, big sleep loss events that would knock me back or sickness or whatever. But if you look at the whole year from that point where I made that decision, I've pretty smoothly sailed up on my lifts. So I guess that's one takeaway that I have is that set a goal and then stick with it. And when I say stick with it, you really you got to stick with something for I think a minimum of 6 months.
Oh yeah.
That's like the absolute bare minimum. Really, it's more like a year.
I do things a year at a time usually.
Yeah.
And
I think that's the better number.
I was talking to somebody earlier about this, and I've said it many times, maybe not on the show, but this whole idea of 3-month training cycles, that comes from the fact that an academic semester is 3 months long. That's actually 4, but when you factor in recruitment, testing, post-testing, all that, you're going to land at about 3 productive months of training, because in a 16-week semester, finals week included, if you did things fairly decently well, you're lucky to get 12 solid weeks there where you're training people. And the thing is, between academia and the bodybuilders, this idea of 3 months to fat loss or 3 months to muscle gain has permeated the industry for about 50 years. And on the bodybuilding side...
P90X.
Yeah. On the bodybuilding side, keep in mind when you're taking a bunch of anabolic steroids, for those of you new listeners, your rate of muscle growth is faster, right? So if they're loading up on a bunch of drugs, eating a bunch of food, and training heavy, sure, they can get something done in 3 months, especially the less advanced they are. Obviously, the more advanced they become, either they got to take more drugs and experiment that way, because it does become a drug contest, of course, in bodybuilding, and the honest ones will tell you that, or they got to spread it out like the rest of us. I think most of them just try to take more gear to, inject their way through the sticking point, But when you're dealing with mediocre genetics, an advanced training status, and the absence of anabolic agents, you're looking at a slow, steady gain in muscle mass, a slow and steady gain in strength beyond the first, 3 to 9 months, depending on, various factors. Novice can make rapid progress for about 3 to 9 months, But we're going to put that aside. Past that point, you're looking at slow and steady gains. Even a novice, let's say that a novice had a great first year and they packed on 20 pounds of lean mass, right? And they gained, let's say 40 pounds of body weight. Let's use clean numbers here. So they gained 40 pounds, half of its muscle, right? And they did that, right? Think about it. That's like, what, a little over 1.5 pounds a month on average, of lean mass.
Oh, yeah.
Which means that if you're no longer a novice, you're going to, under the best of circumstances, you're going to gain muscle mass slower than 1.5 pounds a month. Isn't that interesting, huh? On average, too, because it doesn't happen every single month. It's like nothing happens, and all of a sudden in month 3 or 4, you start to build muscle. So to take it back to my original point, why on earth would you stop when your body's starting to build muscle? Yeah. When you that well said, 3 months is really that's the point when you're just starting to get the wheels rolling. This is where we agree with the professional research people, and they agree with us. You don't really see gains in muscle mass, or they'll call it hypertrophy, until about 8 to 12 weeks. Or some. I think I've seen 6 to 8, and on the lower end of that. But the whole point is, around month 2, you start to see it. That's when I've started to see it in the past. And it's taking longer now because I'm more advanced, but. If that's where you start to see it, why would you stop there? Because you got a little chubby? Just give it a little more time, month 6, month 8, month 9. you're still going to be that same heavier body weight. You're going to look less chubby, and that's something I was explaining to a kid earlier. He's about 6'2". He's 205 most of the time.
Okay.
And I keep getting on him. I'm like,
underweight.
I'm like, you got to get to 220. Well, I have like a dad bod now. And I'm like, for now. I'm like, you keep training. You keep adding
205.
You're under muscle, dude. So, we watched Rip and Marty Gallagher's interview today because a couple members that moved out of the state were visiting, and he was talking about how Rip gets on us about body weight because he is so pissed that he didn't go past 220. And I'm like, I'll show you the moment where he had that realization. And I pull up that interview, and that's where that's where that started, right, Trent?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah, because he asked Marty, how the hell you guys talk about 750 or 800 squats, 750 deadlifts, and 500 benches as though it's the norm. Where did I go wrong? And long story short of it, Marty was like, we would have made you a world champion easily with your structure if you pushed up to 242 or better yet, 275.
Mm-hmm.
So ever since then, Rip just rips into people about this. I was 220. I wasn't heavy enough to do it. You need to be heavier. 5'8", 185 is not enough density per height, blah, 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 blah.
Right.
And, he's right. And, the thing is, most of the people that listen to this show aren't trying to lift the maximum amount of weight possible or even gain the most muscle mass possible, So there's trade-offs to going down that road. Yes, I can get 220 or 242 and probably lift more, but I don't want to get that fat,
Yeah. Yeah, there's a downside to it. So I mean, let me say that. So kind of, I've given this history before on the podcast, but just in a nutshell, if you roll back the clock 2 years, I'm sitting around 195 to 200. So I would compete in the 90 kilo weight class. I was right around that, walking around. And, a year ago, I was in kind of low 190, 191, 192, and now I'm 182, 183. Okay, so and I've been as heavy as 215. So, and I'm 5'8". At those various body weights, like, I absolutely feel better moving my body around, like doing chores out on, taking care of the chickens and gardening and, hauling shit around. I absolutely feel better below 200 pounds and somewhere around 190. I feel better. Like, my joints feel better. I, have more energy. It's easier for me to hike. It's easier for me to run. All that stuff.
Right.
Now, I'm not as strong, but it's definitely better. Now, when I get down on the low side, at one point I hit like 170. I think when we saw each other in May at the powerlifting meet, we had some lifters at a powerlifting meet. I think it was like 178. I dipped below 180. You were
skinny as fuck. I remember.
Yeah, I was super skinny, right? I felt like shit. It was awful. So, so there's trade-offs, but it goes both ways. So, because I know, like, for me, it's not really it's not a goal or something I've actively sought out to, like, get lean. But I know for some people that is a goal, right? Mm-hmm. And if you're doing that, like, from a health standpoint, some people are like, well, I don't want to be fat and, like, out of shape and stuff. Okay, I get that.
You want to be skinny and out of shape? Because that's
the thing,
too.
Yeah, you can go too far the other way. So, that's another lesson learned, right? Is I found my bottom this year. I found the bottom, and I was like, no, I don't ever want to be 178 again. That was fucking terrible. And I'm still way too skinny now, but I'm getting, but at least I'm several pounds up from there.
So I learned a few things. First half of this year, I was still running variations of this hypertrophy arm specialization workout, right? Mm-hmm. And, to give a review of what that looked like, I had an arm day, the first day of the week, biceps and triceps, single joint exercises, and close grip bench was in there as well. But so it was like 3 bicep exercises, a close grip bench, and 2 tricep exercises. So 3 and 3, right? Mm-hmm. And then, I had a day where I squatted, and then I had a day where I deadlifted and did a bunch of pull downs, rows, and shrugs, It was a back day, so to speak. And then I had a day where I just benched and did dips and some additional tricep work. And I'd recycled this 4 times. So I did this for a total of 13 months. And I'd say after the first 6 months, I started getting elbow tendonitis that I'm still dealing with. It's almost gone. And then the second 6 months, I kept adding to stuff, and then I couldn't really add to my curls because my elbows hurt so much, so I was trying to add where I could. And by the end of it, I was just like, all right, let's just lift heavy again, and I, hired a guy briefly, tried, some block training just to remember how shitty block training is and how it doesn't work. It doesn't work. It's just fucking bullshit.
I'm not a fan.
I'm not a fan. It's bullshit. It's overcomplicated bullshit, And, it kind of went back to the roots. And then, I talked to Rip, I call him every few years when I'm stuck. And, my bottleneck is the bench, right? Mm-hmm. I need 315 bench. I press 225. I cannot bench 315. And the opposite is more common, So I've hit 310 before. And I was like, I want to do this, right? So then, I got a couple nuggets of information from Rip that were helpful. The biggest thing was to, just like on the deadlift, I rack pull. Just like on the press, I eventually pin press. Well, I started doing pin bench presses from the bottom up. And I do 1 set of 5, just like the rack pull once a week. But in constructing this new program, I started reflecting back on all the arm stuff I did. And what I kind of figured out from it was most of my actual arm growth came from rowing and benching,
Yeah,
imagine that,
sure.
right?
Yeah,
and I think back on it, I'm like, the bicep curls were kind of a small contributor, like I could probably, I probably need one, like just a barbell curl or a dumbbell curl or alternate the two, but I don't need 3 arm exercises. I don't need any tricep work. I think the close grip bench was the big driver there, right?
Yes.
So it also made me rethink bench pressing in general. And one of the big lessons I took away was, if you're bench pressing for pecs, you need to run up your dumbbells, and I have the setup now to do that here. I got fractional plates, I got dumbbell stands, and I got, dumbbells. And if you're doing it for pec growth, you got to do dumbbells. So then I think about it, I'm like, well, barbell, you get more range of motion on the elbow than you do on the shoulder. So it's a great tricep builder. Mm-hmm. So I'm like, okay, so why not just drive most of my volume from close grip bench pressing and lockout work and do very little just regular bench pressing, but make sure it's in there, right? And that's what I've done effectively. I'm doing, my volume day is all close grip. Then I do pins from the bottom up, reset each rep. And then I do regular bench plus some volume on incline with dumbbells, because I also recognize that doing it from an incline angle, as much as we want to make fun of incline and bodybuilders, it does elicit muscle growth on the proximal end of the pectorals for whatever reason, just the flat bench.
Upper pecs.
Yeah, the upper pecs, just the, so whatever, it does that. I saw it happen fast last year, so that was one thing from that workout that I noticed almost immediately was just hitting that angle, filled my chest out in areas that, hadn't been growing. Anyway, so what I took away from all this was what I already knew to be true was true. Most of your muscle growth, and when I say I'm talking about most people. I'm not talking about a strong bodybuilder on a bunch of gear who's chasing the last 2%. I'm not talking about him. And you are not him, and you will probably never be him. So stop trying to train like him, okay?
Yeah.
Single joint exercises aren't what you need. The compounds are what is driving all this, and what was absent from my training was I neglected rows and I neglected bench press. I did chin-ups, I did presses. I was pretty religious with those for years. And I did a little bit of bench here, and I did like no rows. I really didn't row at all, So that arm program, that was the first time I rowed consistently. I did a lot of rows. And now I'm just not rowing because I'm lazy. Just truth be told, I do it every other week probably. I probably skip my rows, 1 week, and then I feel bad about it. Then I do them the next week. I don't skip my main exercise, although I've been kind of bad with press lately, because that was the other thing I learned this year. When you're really trying to drive the bench, you don't give a shit about the press because you're just sore in the relevant muscles, and you feel like you can't press anything. You don't want to do it,
Right.
And it might explain why, when I was pressing a lot, I didn't care about bench, I did it, I made sure I got it in there. Like, I'm going to press after this episode because I skipped it last week. But right now I'm benching, I'm squatting, I'm deadlifting, and I'm trying to make sure I get a press in there, What I kind of got from it was that, for as far back as I can remember, I would complain that, I can't get any arm growth. And there was a point where I complained I couldn't get any deltoid growth, and I fixed that with pressing, right? Well, it's no wonder I couldn't get any arm growth. I'm not freaking benching a whole lot, I wasn't really benching a whole lot. And I didn't do any rows. I never trained the row until last year,
Right.
And when I did, things grew, And right now, I'm, I've weighed myself for the first time probably since summer, maybe spring. And I was 190 at the end of the day. So I'm guessing I'm somewhere in the high 180s right now.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. I saw my dad over Christmas, and the first thing he said was, "I look strong," And, that's no surprise. I would expect that. I've put on some size up top. But then later he asked me if I lost weight, that I looked thinner than I did last time. So what he's really saying is I look, that my waist looks smaller because my upper body looks bigger.
Yeah, right.
And I don't think that's from any of the single joint stuff I did. Other than shrugs. Shrugs did make my traps grow,
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like now, so here's the thing about single joint. I'm going to come back to this. I feel like now my traps are growing because I'm deadlifting heavier. So like I just matched my best deadlift ever on a week ago Monday. I hit 465 for 5, and I did it on one attempt. Usually it takes me a couple times,
Yeah. Nice.
So I might be looking at a deadlift PR next week. I hope so. But my traps have grown, and so this is something that I started thinking about. I haven't shrugged in months, But I think when you do single joint exercises, it's kind of like what Rip talks about with guys not being able to feel their low back, and then he has them do like Supermans, and they can engage their low back right after that,
Mm-hmm.
I think when you do single joint exercises and train them to a point, you get better at stabilizing that joint, engaging those muscles in the bigger lifts. And I think that's what's happening now with some of this stuff,
Sure.
Like I'm just more stable in the bench press. I feel my back a lot more when I bench press, and I'm sure I'm, isometrically engaging my traps more when I deadlift and do that stuff,
Right. Yes.
And I think that's what they're for. They're not meant to be trained to these really heavy weights for most people, Like, I kind of came up with this continuum, right? Like, if it's a compound, you want to keep the reps low, because if you start adding reps beyond 5, that's where we draw the line, you start to have some muscles fail before other muscles. So on a squat or a deadlift, I'm referring to the low back,
Mm-hmm.
And injury risk aside, that's obvious. When that happens, you're no longer doing the same lift, right?
Right.
When you go to the other side of the spectrum and you're doing a single joint exercise, like a skull crusher or a bicep curl with elbow flexion only, right? You're not raising the arms, right? The same thing happens if you do the opposite, right? If you go low rep, heavy weight, it eventually, that curl is going to turn into a reverse clean, or that skull crusher is going to slide behind your head and turn into a pullover,
Yeah. Right.
Because you can't manage heavy weights over one joint, doing a single joint action. Not designed for that, right? So this is something that I need to make. I hope I can just dig deep for some energy and make a quick Instagram video for this. This is something I've come up with, is that, rep ranges are contextual, right? People are always talking about reps broadly speaking, like you need to do this many reps for this goal, and they completely ignore the exercise. They never talk about reps in the context of the movement, which is what I've just done. So one of the things I learned is, 20s and 30s, great for something like a skull crusher. Stupid, fucking stupid. Like you're an amoeba, single-celled organism if you're doing a 30-rep squat, right? It's like you have not just failed the IQ test, you shouldn't have been allowed to take it to begin with. It doesn't apply to you. So, 30-rep skull crusher, sure. I think that makes sense. It's a single joint action, You don't want to do 10 sets of 30, because it has the same effect. You get tendonitis, or you might get lucky and not. So if you're that guy who didn't, good for fucking you, dude. Most people are going to get some sort of pain from that, right? But my point is, skull crusher, 30 reps, go for it. 20 reps, go for it. If you're doing 10 or less, get ready for your elbows to hurt. And it's probably not going to stay a skull crusher. It'll turn into an LTE or possibly a pullover,
Yeah, right.
But then you go into what did we call them last time? Double joint, bi-joint exercises?
Bijointal.
Yeah, bijointal exercises. So something like an LTE, right? You're going behind the head, you're extending the shoulder, you're extending the elbow, or a standard bicep curl, barbell curl, where you're raising, flexing the shoulder, flexing the bicep. Something like that, 8 to 12, that classic 8 to 12 range probably makes sense there, because if you start doing 5 or less on a bicep curl, it's going to turn into a reverse clean. And on Tricep extension, it's going to turn into a pullover where your lats are doing most of the work.
Right.
So, something like that, where there's a couple joints moving at the same time, 8 to 12 probably works. Now, if you're using 3 or more joints, like a squat, right, your ankles, your hips, your knees, you got 3 joints going there at a time, something like that, you want to do 5 or less, So, the more joints in a movement, the fewer the reps. The fewer the joints involved in performing a movement, the higher the reps. This is pretty simple and pretty fucking obvious too, but yet nobody wants to talk about it that way. They just want to talk about reps broadly and say you need 15 sets of 30 for hypertrophy.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing that corresponds with this too is load, right? Like, yeah, you need the exercise for context, but then also that implies loads. Right. If you're doing a squat, it's a far different load than a leg extension.
Of course.
Right. If you're doing if you're doing a row, that's a far heavier weight than a bicep curl.
Absolutely.
So that's the other part when you're talking about like, how much stress you're imposing on someone when you're talking about sets and reps is like, it's meaningless until you actually put the weight on there.
That's right.
And I think, we're saying the same thing. It's also meaningless until you put the exercise on there. Mm-hmm. But the exercise is going to dictate the weight being moved too. Yeah. So, that totally makes sense.
Yeah. And, I don't have a fucking p-value for you. And guess what? Neither do they.
Right.
Let that sink in.
Well, and again, like, how many studies are out there where they're doing this for an entire year?
How many studies can be fucking generalized? Come on. That's the more important
right,
question.
Yeah.
None of them. Human subjects research is bullshit. Largely fucking bullshit.
Yeah.
It's just, it's narrow in scope, just like the anecdotal stuff that we do. Most of these studies, I would argue all of these studies, the results that are reported can only be generalized to the participants in the study.
Yeah,
and we're gonna dive into this next year.
All 9 of them, all 11 of them.
Well, fuck, man. Let's just say 14,000.
Okay. Yeah,
how many people? 14,000 Americans. How many people are in this country? 330 million.
Yeah.
Do the math.
Drop in the bucket.
Because they'll say, if you recruit enough subjects, that washes all that. Well, what's enough subjects? Who decides? Right?
Right. Yeah.
Who decides what enough is? Since when is a fraction of a % of a population enough, right?
Yeah. There's a whole lot of pussies out in the world.
Exactly. Sneak preview here, people. Professional research on human subjects is limited by the mere fact that we can't pick you at random. And because we can't pick you at random to participate in a study, that means that we can't generalize the findings of that study to the broader population of interest. So what the fuck does that mean? This is a sneak preview because we're going to go into this. That means that if you live on the 3rd floor of an apartment and I want to study everybody on the 3rd floor and I just take volunteers, well, then I can only I can only generalize those findings to those volunteers. Especially, let's say that 3rd floor is, a fucking high rise that's real wide and there's a lot of people, right? Let's say it's the 3rd floor of 1,000 people, right? It's a pretty wide, big fucking building. It doesn't exist, but we're just going to try to make this practical. Well, let's say only 10 people enroll. That's not even that's what, 1%,
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Is that going to tell us what's going to happen to the other, 990? Right?
No, of course not.
Of course not. But then who decides, right? But let's put that aside, right? If I take volunteers, then I can only talk to you about how those findings apply to those volunteers, not to the other 990 residents of that floor. Because I didn't flip a coin and decide which 10 I was going to pick, Yeah. And is 10 even enough, That's the other question. Who decides, right? So random sampling gets ignored a lot because we can't do it. It's unethical. I can't flip a coin and study your neighborhood and decide that these residents are going to participate in the study and these are not. So therefore, let's say we're studying a neighborhood, right? Let's say we're studying your neighborhood, your town. I'm talking to you out there listening. I can't flip a coin and decide which residents are going to participate. So therefore, you don't all have the same opportunity. So therefore, whatever I find only applies to the people that participate. I can't generalize that out. And, I could try and tell you the lie that, I'll just recruit, quote unquote, enough people, which is a vague term, right? Well, we're going to cite previous studies. Also, we're going to, go and look at how many people the last jerk off recruited to decide how many I'm going to recruit. Meanwhile, I wasn't, who decides that he was okay,
Right. Well, for specific to exercise science, what we do, like how do you, even if you could randomly sample, right? Even if you're an evil dictator that can do these things.
Well, now you got compelled participation. That's a confounding variable.
Exactly, right? Like what we do is volitional, right? Training hard is not a given, and you can't make someone train hard.
You're not going to find these answers in studies because of what I just told you. You're not going to have enough people participating in the study, and you're not randomly sampling people from the population you're trying to generalize this to. In many cases, they just try to generalize this to the ever so broad and vague, everyone should do X, Everyone. Yeah. Who the fuck is everyone,
I'm just in general, I'm so done with the scientific method as it is practiced in the scientific literature. It is of such vanishingly small use to me that I just don't care. Whatever benefits that are there, I don't need them. They're just, it's a waste of time trying to find them in the sea of bullshit. And I think the thing is too, that the more you kind of fixate on this kind of stuff, these little niggly details, evidence-based,
you missed the big picture.
You're pulling yourself away from the much, much, much more impactful tool that you have, which is your own observations. Okay. So, your own anecdata, if you want to call it that, is very valuable. And, however you want to whatever depth you want to do this whole training thing, if you want to get the good results out of it, you have to learn how to observe patterns in your own training. Even if you're working with a coach, right? The best trainees that I have that go the furthest, they observe what's going on when they train. And they give that information to me. And a lot of times we're like, yeah, I've noticed that too. They'll point out something and be like, yeah, I kind of thought that was going on. But sometimes they point out stuff that I didn't know was going on. I didn't see it. Or, more importantly, I didn't feel it, right? I can't experience exactly what they experience as a third party.
I think one of the bigger points here is that when people talk about research, they're usually comparing an individual study to another. As I've highlighted earlier, there are structural problems, and I plan to dive into those next year. But then also, there's an issue of reproducibility. If you can look at an anecdote and see a reproducible outcome, does it fucking matter that it's an anecdote at this point? When the outcome is clearly reproducible? And maybe it's something you can't necessarily study in a controlled lab. A lot of things are because, aside from everything I've mentioned already, you can't control for lifestyle, right? Like, you can't micromanage somebody's lifestyle outside of your study. And if you have them live in the lab, that's also not their lifestyle. So you're not getting actual lifestyle behaviors captured. You're getting behaviors captured under, the context of living in the research lab. So,
yeah, sure.
Again, the question you really want to ask yourself is, how irrelevant is an anecdote if it's reproducible?
Right. It's of course it's relevant. Of course it is.
Of course.
And that's the thing is like, so
cell phones work. Cell phones work. They didn't go through a peer-reviewed process. There's no fucking papers on cell phones, no engineering papers in the peer-reviewed literature. They just made cell phones,
Yeah, right. Exactly. And so, my whole thing is that if you
and
get
they
lost
work
in this world,
every day.
They do. Yes, clearly. Well, if you get lost in this world, and then you're not honing your own observational powers, and that's an enormously powerful tool, and that is science. That is like the basis of science is observation of your with your own five senses, right? That's where it all starts, and I think so that's that's really like, I'm looking at my little list that I put together, like what the hell did I learn this year? And a lot of it's that, it's just sort of observing things that I see, like patterns in my life, and drawing conclusions from that. So
yeah,
like to kind of bring it full circle, this has been a very challenging year for me, and I've learned just how important sleep is, how important food is. I've learned how to offset a lot of the uncontrollable stresses I've had in my life by shoring things up in the controllable parts of them, right? And one thing that I have found that's been very interesting is the better quality of food that I eat, the leaner I get.
Isn't that interesting?
Now, there's a lot of people that will just like talk to their blue in the face how it's just all macros. Something changed with your behavior, your macros changed, and it doesn't make a difference. Oh, people claim it's a myth that raw milk is more easily digest, that it causes less, there's less incidence of lactose intolerance with raw milk versus pasteurized milk and all that stuff. Dude, like I said, I don't care. I'm just using my own powers of observation. The better quality of food that I eat, the better I feel, the more efficient. Well, I've had some theories of why it might happen. I don't know if they're true or not, but this is the observations, right? The better I feel, the better my joints feel, the leaner I get without necessarily losing weight. Now, I lost some weight. That's a confounding variable in my case, but I've been stable for several months now.
Amazing, isn't it?
Right. Yeah, and I've lost like 2 inches off my waist, even though I've gone up in weight from my low point this year.
Right.
And I think that trend will continue. We'll see next year. Hopefully next year I can get myself back up to like 190 or so, and we'll see. Like, does my waist pretty much stay the same or not? But that's been a big lesson. And really, this year, it's just been a slow iteration for me. Not a lot changed, but I've pretty much this year, I have, as close as I reasonably can, eliminated seed oils from my diet.
Good.
Pretty much entirely. There's a few times, we eat at restaurants or whatever, you can't avoid it, but that's one thing. We also eat pretty much all meat that we've raised or that we've bought from farmers in our community, and we know how it's raised. And dude, there's no question. If you just put a chicken in the crock pot that you buy from the store, it's Tyson brand, and you get the thing out and you eat it and you taste it and you make stock with the carcass, okay, you can put that stock right next to the stock that you make from one of the chickens that we raised. It is a completely night and day difference in the flavor, the amount of fat that we get, like how many more nutrients are probably in that stock that was made from our chicken. Again, it's just doing this side by side. It's a pretty huge difference. And I think all those little changes over time add up to a pretty profound difference in my health and body composition.
I would agree. I don't think we really understand why that happens, because there's other people that report similar things, and we just can't measure it. I'm not one of these guys that's going to say, oh, that's wrong because it's not in the peer-reviewed literature. There's no evidence. I'm just not one of those people, I'm not also going to say that I believe 100% that's right for every person either. Something that you're fucking doing is working, in that assortment of things. And I'm going to say keep doing it because the outcome is fucking good. So if you're seeing that outcome in your life, then why the fuck wouldn't you keep doing it? And somebody else is listening. It's worth a try. It worked for one guy, it might work for you. Unless you have reason to believe something like that would harm you, you would know better than us, because, there are some people that can't eat certain things or do certain things with their life, So the whole point is we're not sitting here generalizing, saying, well, it works for Trent, it works for everybody, but they are. They're taking garbage data, playing around with statistics, ignoring glaring assumptions in their methodology, and then telling you that, well, this applies to everybody. And they may not say it like that because they're real careful with their words, so they can go back and say, well, I didn't say tomato, I said tomato,
You're right.
But, what the inference is from the average person who doesn't know all this research jargon is that, well, they found this in a study and it's scientific, so therefore I should do this, right? Not necessarily, I'm never going to be that guy that does podcast episodes on research papers and says, "Oh, look what this paper found," and then say, "Well, this paper's bullshit," and then I'm going to cite other fucking bullshit papers that say the opposite, right? Like we're never going to do that here because that's not really what you need to know. What you need to understand is how this works structurally. The problems are more macro in nature, not micro. So comparing two papers is like comparing two turds. You know what I mean?
Yeah, right.
Like, I hate to say that.
They both smell.
The thing is, there's a lot of good people in academia. I've met them. There's a lot of bad people there too, unfortunately, and I met them as well. So I've been hesitant to touch on this topic because of the people I do respect. But
it's not their fault. The way that the system is not their fault individually.
Exactly.
It is what it is, right? It's emergent, right? Yeah. It got here over a long, tortured process, right? Yeah. It's so it's no one person's fault that this is the way the field is, but it is the way that the field is. Mm-hmm. And I think it's important to know kind of some of those the pitfalls, just because there are people in the media and elsewhere who will try to browbeat you with so and so study says, and just to kind of understand, like you probably know it's wrong anyway, but just understand some of the reasons why. Mm-hmm. I think that could be helpful to be armed with that knowledge.
Yeah, I think so.
Well, so I have a question for you, kind of changing tack here a little bit, and we can wrap up with this. Do you have any goals in 2024 with your fitness? I
do.
What are those goals?
I want to bench 315.
Okay.
And then I probably want to drop some of this weight that I put on. I went into this with this mentality. I'm going to bench 315, and I'm going to gain as much as I comfortably need to do it. It's kind of cool being 190 and not looking 190. This is a first for me, Usually I'm like, shit, I'm freaking heavy, But I don't have big goals on the other lifts. I really want a big bench. I want to stop skipping the press and the rowing, the back work. Yeah. Like I'd like to be less lazy with my, back work and overhead work. The press I haven't been totally lazy with. Truth be told, this is like more of a recent development in the last month. I've only pressed twice, and part of it's scheduled too with the holidays. Mm-hmm. I'm just very fixated on the bench. I'm fixated on the bench because it's the one lift I have a hard goal on. But, honestly, I want to bench 315. I want to, stay on top of my hiking. I've been kind of slacking on that. And, then from there, I just, drop a few pounds. I don't want to be super skinny, super lean, but, a little bit lighter than I am now. And, just keep doing what I'm doing, show up, try to add a little bit more, and not do stupid high reps again because... that proved to be a waste of time. I mean, not really. It was cool. It challenges you in different ways. But at the end of the day, 465 for 5 on the deadlift is still hard, even though I did 450 for 8. And that was like this big 8-rep PR. 465 for 5 was still pretty fucking hard. And we'll see how many PRs I get out of that, So,
right.
At a certain point, the stimulus changes. And, getting really good at reps gets you really good at reps, And maybe you get a little bit of muscle growth out of that. But... is it going to transfer to the big heavy weights? I don't know.
Yeah, the carryover can be limited. I think there is some,
it's accurate.
But it's limited.
I'd say it's limited. Yeah, I want to say there's some. I have a hard time believing it's zero. And
it depends on the person too. That's the other thing too. Yeah, it's at your level when we're talking about this level of advancement. Training this long. It's really some people are going to get some decent carryover that's worth doing. Some people are going to get nothing. And then, if that's you, then
it's very individual.
Yeah. And then you just got to throw it out, man. Yeah. So it's kind of funny. I feel the same way about the bench as you. Like when I benched 315, I stopped caring. I ended up benching, I benched 315, 316, and 320 on 3 separate occasions.
Yeah.
And I just did not care whatsoever about adding a single more pound on my bench after that.
That's how it was
if
at
it
the
happened,
press. Yeah. When I pressed 225, that was me.
Yeah, and I think I've kind of gotten there with the press because I've hit some heavy presses recently, and the layback that's required for me to drive it up higher, I'm not willing to do it anymore.
Yeah,
it bugs the shit out of my back. So I'm like,
understand.
You know what? I don't really care about the really high intensity presses anymore. I care more about my 5s and 8s on that now. But yeah, I think for me, I'm still working it out. But I think for me in 2024, I want to make a commitment to growing some muscle in my back and my arms, And it's going to be a lot of what you're talking about, rowing. All the compounds are still going to be there. But I think what for me, I was talking about goals and sticking with it. This year I made a clear goal. I want to drive the numbers on my main lifts up for sets of 5 and 3s. Mm-hmm. And this next year, since I've kind of back to a decent sort of platform, to work with, I really want to bring up some of the lifts that I've been neglecting entirely this year, and I didn't do a whole lot of the year before either. So I'm still kind of working on thinking through what exactly I want to do, but that's going to be my goal. I'm going to commit to getting my rows up and getting some of those other lifts up, and just see what happens this year.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable.
Just kind of let the chips fall where they may on the compounds.
I'd say it's reasonable.
Yep. And I think more activity too. And I didn't touch on this, but that's another thing I've learned is I think a lot of the reason why I've had such a high metabolism, my metabolic rate has stayed high this year despite training a lot less in the gym, is because my general activity is high. It's all very low intensity stuff. I'm not like out biking and running, and it's all just kind of playing around the house, moving stuff, doing chores, but it's a lot of physical chores, and I think that really has made a big impact on my metabolic rate. So that's another thing. I want to try to do some more organized activity next year.
Yep.
Underrated part of fitness, I think.
Cool.
All right, so there you go. There's 2023. I hope you learned something.
I hope so.
Thanks for tuning in. I really appreciate everyone that has listened. Thanks for letting us in your ear holes, and thanks for letting us kind of blabber on about health and fitness. We're very passionate about what we do, and I hope that we are a voice of reason in the sea of BS and grifting that is so much of the health and fitness industry. So thanks for listening, and I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I echo that. I can't tell you how much I appreciate y'all listening to my ramblings every other week. Most of the time, we took a little longer on this one because we wanted it at the end of the year. But half the time I just kind of bullshit with Trent for a little bit before we do this, come up with a topic and hope for the best. And so far things are looking good. I always laugh when somebody calls me for a consult and says, I feel like I'm talking to a celebrity. I'm like, what the fuck? I'm just a fucking gym owner over here, man. But, I appreciate those comments, and, I like that y'all are listening. So hopefully next year we can teach you some more. I look forward to recording the next one. For me, it's just 2 weeks from now, but that's also next year. So I'll acknowledge that for y'all. Mm-hmm. And, we'll go from there. So let's close out this last one. First of all, Merry Christmas to everybody, since, that just happened. Happy New Year. And thank you for tuning in to the Weights and Plates podcast. You can find me at weightsandplates.com. If you are in Metro Phoenix, you can find the gym at weightsandplatesgym.com. And we are just south of Sky Harbor Airport in the South Mountain Village. You can find me, this is where I spend most of my time posting things, on Instagram, _Robert_Santana. And the gym has one, weights, _and _plates.
Very good. I'm at the same place as I always am on Instagram at marmalade_cream. And you can find me if you have any questions about online coaching or just any coaching questions in general. You can just shoot me a question about your own training or technique or whatever. People do that sometimes, and I'm happy to get those messages. You can DM me on Instagram, or you can send me an email, jonesbarbellclub@gmail.com. All right, we'll talk to you again in a couple weeks in the next year.